But maybe we could give a round of applause to Ollie as he comes in. Ollie, I think we'll just leave you to it, but maybe you want to start by introducing yourself.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter and Miriam. I'm going to hop up onto this stage bit so that I can get a lovely view of you all. And I'm going to sort myself out. Well, yeah, as Peter and Miriam said, my name is Ollie, and I work for a church in central London where I live with my wife, Katie, and a tiny hamster that honestly I love more than I love most of my real-life human friends. When I was a student, I studied maths up in Durham, and now I work alongside university students like yourselves. And I do that because I am convinced that Jesus is good news for students today in Southampton. And that's why I'm here with you, because your friends in the Christian Union believe that Jesus is the sort of good news that will turn your life upside down if you let him. And they've invited me to talk a little bit about that with you this evening, beginning with that title that Miriam let us know about this evening. The title is Finding Freedom When I'm Not Sure Who I Am. Where can I look when I feel lost? I'll be offering some thoughts here from the front, and those thoughts are going to be broken up with questions for discussion around your tables. We're doing that because at the CU we value honest conversations about things that really matter, and I hope that each one of us will feel very free to be as honest as we want to be in those conversations. Okay, let's make a start. Hands up if you have a phone on you right now. Just put a hand in the air. And now keep your hand up if you've ever felt like throwing that phone off a bridge. Okay, if you lowered your hand, look around the room. All the rest of us need to talk to you at the end of this evening. You can put your hand down now. Those of us who kept our hands up, you're the ones who are going to resonate with the position that I found myself in November 2015. Because in November 2015, I was a frustrated man. I was a frustrated man because technology is frustrating. And in November 2015, the way that technology was frustrating for me was that my phone had started randomly sending old messages at random to random people in my phone book, which it won't take much imagination for you to realize can be an acutely awkward experience. No, Grandma, sorry, I don't need you to pick me up a six-pack of Red Stripe. That message wasn't meant for you, especially not on a Monday morning in January. Anyway, my solution was the solution that everyone who had their hands up a moment ago has thought about at least once. I was done being enslaved to technology. I did consider the bridge option, but in the end, I just put my phone in that drawer where everyone keeps all their broken old phones. And I decided to see how long I could go without a phone to see what being free from technology would be really like. So, November 2015, I was a free man. No more buzzing, no more doom scrolling, no more phone calls asking whether I'd been missold PPI. I was free. Which is the subject we're thinking about this evening and all of this week, freedom. And I think that is a fantastic topic for you guys to be thinking about at university, because many of you will probably have moved away from home for the first time in at least the past couple of years, which means finding freedom, well, that is your lived reality. I remember the moment I came to realize that for myself, standing in the cereal aisle of Tesco Metro in Durham, seeing someone picking up a packet of Cocoa Pops and thinking, man, I wish I was allowed Cocoa Pops. And then suddenly realizing I could have Cocoa Pops. I could have whatever I wanted for breakfast. For the first time in my life, I was in the driving seat. I was the one calling the shots, or in this case, buying the cereal. It was a beautiful moment for me because freedom, well, freedom is a beautiful thing. But you probably won't need me to tell you that sometimes what you thought was freedom turns out to be something else entirely. Cut back with me to November 2015, where I am in the actual driving seat of an actual car and still blissfully free from my phone. I was driving my now wife, Katie, to Hull, where I was going to drop her off before carrying on up the motorway to Durham to catch up with some old uni mates. Everything was going smoothly, and I was feeling a bit of a hero as I followed actual real-life road signs around the M25 and then up the M1, dropping Katie off in Hull before continuing on up to Durham. But it was when I left Durham to pick Katie up the next day that the problem started. You see, I do not have a good sense of direction, and I know that, but I didn't think that would be a problem because I didn't need a phone to be giving me directions and telling me what to do and ordering me about. Well, I could just follow the road signs all the way to Hull. But the problem is that there came a point where the signposts to Hull started disappearing. I hadn't gone the wrong way. No, I'd correctly followed the signposts to Hull. But some of you have already realized what I failed to realize at the time, which is that Katie wasn't just in Hull in some sort of general sense. She was in a particular house on a particular street in a particular part of Hull. And it turns out Hull has more than one house. I'd begun the day thinking I was free, but as the sun began to set over what may or may not have been the River Humber, what I'd thought had been freedom began to look a lot more like being lost. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because what looks like freedom can very quickly turn into something else. I'm telling you this because life comes at you fast, and I doubt I'm the only one who has been confronted with the shock realization that the difference between being free and being lost is actually sometimes quite small. You've come to university and you've found a whole new type of freedom. No more set meal times, no more after-party curfews, no more shredded wheat for breakfast. You're at uni and you're free. And that newfound freedom is great, at least for a while. You can take control of your own life and make your own choices. If you want to stay up until 4 a.m. playing FIFA, you can do that. If you want to spend your entire student loan in one unforgettable ASOS order, no one is going to stop you. But there comes a time in each student's life when what you thought was freedom begins to look an awful lot like being aimless and directionless and lost. I wonder, have you been confronted with that difference yet? So here's my first two questions for you to discuss around tables. They'll come up on the screen behind me. First question, when in life have you had that sort of freedom moment, a Cocoa Pops, no phone, 4 a.m. FIFA moment, when you began to realize that you really are free? And secondly, have you ever thought you were free and then realized you were lost? And how would you describe the difference? 4 or 5 minutes discussing those questions on our tables. Do you want to draw that back in there? The difference between being lost and being free can be surprisingly small. And I wonder, what will be the difference for you as a student in Southampton? What will be the difference for you in your life between being free and being lost? That question may well be the most important question you answer during your time at university. And one thing that the answer will depend on is what sort of world you find yourself living in. If you find yourself tumbling through the sky, hurtling towards the ground at 80 miles an hour, the difference between being free and being lost could be as little as a working parachute cord. If you find yourself driving aimlessly around the back streets of Hull, that difference might be a friendly norther with a telephone. If you find yourself in Jesters during the first few bars of the Baywatch theme, well, the difference between being free and being lost will probably be measured in cups of Gesticle. The difference between being free and being lost can be surprisingly small. And the difference will depend on the sort of world you find yourself in. There is no point in taking a parachute cord to Jesters. It will not help keep your night on track. What you need will depend on what world you're living in. To find freedom without getting lost in the process, you need to know what sort of world you're in. In my final year at uni, I took a module called New Directions in Social Science. And the aim of the professor teaching that course was to challenge the ways in which we thought about the world we were living in. One lecture has stuck in my mind ever since. As we sat down, we were presented with a poem. It was a poem by William Wordsworth with the title, She Dwelt Among the Untrodden Ways. It's only 12 lines long, and it goes like this. It goes, She dwelt among the untrodden ways, beside the springs of Dove, a maid whom there were none to praise, and very few to love. A violet by a mossy stone, half hidden from the eye, fair as a star when only one is shining in the sky. She lived unknown, and few could know when Lucy ceased to be, but she is in her grave, and oh, the difference to me. The professor read that poem out loud, steadily and with minimal expression, and then he looked over his glasses and asked one simple question to be unfolded over the course of the hour. What is that poem about? So the discussion began, and to begin with, well, it seemed obvious. The poem was about a girl, Lucy, who had lived an obscure life and then died. But as we pulled it apart in the lecture, that poem changed. It started to be about a flower, a violet on an untrodden path hidden beside a mossy stone. And when the poem started to be about a flower, it started to be about all sorts of different things. It started to be about secrets and the gift of hidden beauty. It started to be about loss and the pain of unshareable grief. It started to be about perspective and truth and the different ways that each one of us understands and experiences the world around us. At which point there was a pause, and then my friend Rachel, who was sitting next to me, said, maybe this poem isn't about one thing for everybody. Maybe this poem is what you make of it. At which point the professor, who had been sitting back in his chair chewing his pen for 40 minutes, stood up and, like a Hollywood caricature of an English professor, said, what if reality is like that too? What if this world isn't simply a collection of cold, hard facts and numbers that don't care what you think about them? And pointing his chewed pen at us like he thought he was in a Richard Curtis film, he made his point. What if truth is less like an equation and more like a poem? At which point he ended the lecture and sent us on our way. And I, being a math student who had spent the best part of 3 years thinking about cold, hard facts and numbers, walked away from that class thinking, I think I want that to be true. I think I want truth and reality to be less like an equation and more like a poem. So that's my next question for you to discuss around your tables. Do you want truth to be more like an equation or more like a poem? What difference would it make for how you live your life? 5 minutes to discuss those questions around your tables. Do you want to draw that thought to a close there? I want to suggest that whether you think truth is more like an equation or more like a poem will have a huge impact on the way that you live your life in Southampton, on where you'll look for freedom and on what you'll do with what freedom you have. See, if you think truth is like an equation, you'll live your life based on things you can measure. You'll be motivated by solid answers and objective, repeatable results. You'll work out who you are based on what you can see and be certain about, and you'll find freedom by internalizing rules and facts. If you think truth is like an equation, you'll live your life based on things you can measure. If you think truth is like a poem, you'll live your life based on things that you feel. You'll be motivated by open-ended questions and the diversity of different opinions. You'll work out who you are based on how you feel, and you'll look for freedom by resisting rules and expressing yourself from the inside out. If you think truth is like an equation, you'll live your life based on things you can measure. If you think truth is like a poem, you'll live your life based on things you can feel. And if you get it wrong, then you'll get nowhere. You'll set out thinking you've found freedom, but you'll quickly realize you're not free, you're just lost. Because if truth is like a poem, but you treat it like an equation, you'll spend your life chasing solid answers in a world full of question marks, chasing certainty in an uncertain world. But if truth is like an equation, but you treat it like a poem, well, then you'll spend your life pouring out your heart to a universe that doesn't really care how you feel, pouring your heart out to a universe that was never actually listening in the first place. Lost in a world of question marks, or lost in a world that doesn't care. The more I thought about it as I walked home, the more it felt like that professor was actually presenting me with two bad options. In one option, the universe has something to say, but it's never actually listening to me. And in the other, the universe is listening, but it doesn't actually have anything to say. Two ways to think about truth, which felt to me at least like two competing ways of being lost. Lost in a never listening, or lost in a never speaking world. But later that day, I was doing one of those really strange things that Christians do that sounds super weird until you start doing it for yourself. I was reading the Bible, reading a story about Jesus, and I want to read a little bit of what I read. You'll have in the middle of your tables these books that say John on them. If you grab one of those, reach into the middle and turn to page 45 in at least this one. And if you can't get hold of one of those, the little section is also going to appear behind me. In this one, it's page 45, and it's John, and it's the big 14, chapter 14, and it's the little 5, verse 5, just under where it says, Jesus, the way to the Father. And when you've got sight of that, do you want to give me a big smile so I know you can see it? Page 45 in my one, big 14, little 5, chapter 14, verse 5. And this is what it says. Let me read it for us. Thomas said to him, that's Jesus, Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? And Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I want to suggest that in these verses, we can find a way of making sense of the universe that is better than anything that professor in my lecture had to offer. See, the claim that Jesus is making in this verse, in those words, when you think about it, is absolutely breathtaking. Jesus is saying, if you are lost, come to me because I am the way. He's saying, if you're confused, come to me because I am the truth. He's saying, if you're empty, come to me because I am the life. And do you notice he doesn't just claim to know the way, he claims to be the way. He doesn't just claim to know the truth, he claims to be the truth. He doesn't just claim to know about the life that we're looking for and so desperately need. He claims to be that life. Because according to Jesus, in this verse, truth isn't like an equation, and it isn't really like a poem either. It's much more like a person, because truth is like Jesus. Identity, meaning, and purpose. Ultimately, according to Jesus in this verse, these things aren't for you to make for yourself, reading them out of the universe like reality is a modern art gallery and can be made to mean whatever you want it to. And ultimately, according to Jesus, identity, meaning, and purpose aren't even for you to discover for yourself, condensing them out of the universe, like reality is a giant science experiment in which your main job is to get your feelings out of the way of the facts. according to Jesus, in this verse, identity, meaning, purpose, and direction are gifts for you to be given and for you to receive, because the beating heart of reality is found in relationship with Jesus. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like that professor was presenting me with two competing ways of being lost. Lost in a world of question marks, a world that's listening but never actually speaking, or lost in a world that doesn't care, a world that's speaking but never actually listening. But in these words of Jesus, we find a whole other possibility. We find the sort of world where truth cares about your feelings without making your feelings the measure of what's really real. Because if what Jesus is saying is true, then at the heart of reality is a listening and speaking person. And identity, purpose, and direction are found in relationship with him. So here's my next set of questions for us. Do you live your life more like truth is an equation or a poem or a person? And then secondly, Jesus didn't just claim to know the truth, he claimed to be the truth. How would you go about assessing that claim? 4 or 5 minutes around our tables discussing those questions. Do you want to draw that thought in there? Come back with me to November 2015. As the sun set over what may or may not have been the River Humber, what I needed wasn't a poem. It wasn't even an equation. What I needed was a person. I needed someone to get me to a phone so I could speak to Katie and ask for her help. The difference for me between being free and being lost was a conversation with the person I was trying to find, so I could ask her where she was and how to find her. And this week of events in Southampton CU, that Southampton CU are putting on, is based on the belief that each one of us is in the same sort of situation. This week is based on the belief that what each one of us needs is a conversation with the person that we will only ever be lost without. I wonder, do you realize that that is what Christianity is all about? Christianity isn't ultimately like a poem, only ever meaning what you can make it mean. And it isn't ultimately like an equation, an uncaring set of rules for you to follow or fail. Ultimately, Christianity is a relationship with the person who sits on the throne of the universe, the person whose words are so powerful that they called all creation into existence, the person so splendid that this whole universe is charged with his glory. As Christians, we believe that living in this universe without knowing Jesus is a bit like living in a castle without knowing its king. It's big and it's scary and it's confusing until you've gotten to know the one ruling over it, Jesus Christ, the King of the universe, whose presence brings life and whose words are truth itself. The claim of Christianity is that there is someone sitting on the throne of reality and that person wants to have a relationship with you. Whether or not you believe that's true, I wonder, would you want it to be true? Would you want reality to have a speaking, listening person at its center? And if it did, and you could speak to them, I wonder, what would you say? So these are the last questions that I've got for us to discuss around our tables. I'll give us a little bit longer on these ones. Firstly, would you want reality to have a speaking, listening person at its center? If it did, and you could speak to them, what would you say? And if you could speak to Jesus, what would you want to say to him? And lastly, what questions would you need to ask to assess whether Jesus is as big as he claims? 6 or 7 minutes around our tables to discuss those before I wrap up. Do you want to draw your thoughts to a close there? In a moment, I'm going to hand back over to our hosts, but before I do, let me just wrap up for us. As Christians, we believe that living in the universe without knowing Jesus is like living in a castle without knowing its king. So during this week, we want to give you the opportunity to get to know him. We've got talks every lunchtime and evening where we'll be exploring life's big questions and what Jesus has to say about them. And you can find information about that on flyers that look like this. But the best way to get to know Jesus is by reading about him for yourself. On your tables, you'll find these books that we've already looked at. These are first century eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life. On your tables, we've got copies of those in English, and at the back, we've got copies of those in simplified and traditional Chinese. They're a gift from us to you, and I would love to invite you to take one away and read it for yourself. What I'd suggest is that as you read through it, you put ticks next to things you like, crosses next to things you don't like, and question marks next to things that confuse you. And then what I'd suggest you do is get a friend from the CU to buy you a drink to discuss what you made of it. And let me say, if there is no one obvious to do that with, grab one of these forms, fill it in, and we would love to connect you with someone for you to chat with. The difference between being free and being lost, well, that difference can sometimes be very little. And it could turn out that it is as small as the 40 minutes it will take you to read that book. But for now, let me say thank you so much for listening, and I'm going to hand back over to Miriam and to Peter.
Thank you. Lovely. Thank you very much, Ollie, for that. As Ollie said, the books on the table are all free, so please do take one away. And if there's one that you saw but there's not any more left on the table, then ask, and we'll try and get you one as well. So, yeah, that's great.
There we go. Tonight isn't the end. This type of event we're running all week. We have talks similar to this, lunchtimes and evenings. In particular, tomorrow we're discussing the idea of justice and injustice. At lunchtime, 12 and 1 o'clock, we've got lunch and a talk called Unequal World, Unjust God. And then in the evening, we're looking at finding freedom when everything feels unfair. Is there such a thing as justice? We hope to see you there.
Okay, so that is technically the formal kind of end of this evening, but we're not packing up. So please do hang around for longer, keep chatting, keep asking questions, and we'll be on the tables for ages. So there's also some cakes and some tea and coffee at the back. So feel free to grab a cake and tea and coffee and then come and sit back down again and keep chatting with people. There's no rush to head off. But thank you very much for coming, and really hope that you enjoy the rest of the evening. See you tomorrow.